Welcome to American Education FM, everybody. I'm Dr. Sean Brooks. Welcome back, everybody. Alrighty, here we go. I'll tell you what. I'm going to start with this and bring this up sort of at the very top here. I made mention of this in the last episode, just kind of briefly, and then I actually decided to reach out to this particular individual, and it was interesting to say the least. It was an education on, of course, the mind frame of this particular individual, but I'm specifically referring to Sarah Westall. And the only reason that I reached out to Sarah Westall stemmed from a listener of the show who is actually a source of mine who works for Tyson Foods. And they were listening to a podcast called the Common Sense Podcast, as I made mention of again in the last episode. And they said that Sarah Westall is on this show and is attacking Amazing Polly, as is their handle, on this particular show. And again, just going after them and saying, they don't understand why they're going after the wellness company and why they went after Sarah Westall specifically, which was not the case, as it turns out. But either way, I'll get to that in a second. But the only reason that I actually reached out to Sarah Westall via email was because I heard her then the very next day on Dr. Dave Janda's radio show saying the exact same kinds of things and not really bringing any proof. It was a lot of sort of name calling and accusations and bringing up a lack of ethics among, with regard to Amazing Polly and a number of other things. And I thought to myself, wait a minute. Who goes on a radio tour, so to speak, bashing a person because it's possible that this individual, again, Amazing Polly, might know more about a particular subject than someone else? That really confused me, and I thought to myself, that seems kind of petty. And then I thought, if Sarah Westall has proof of some wrongdoing that has something to do with Amazing Polly, or it brings up a lack of ethics or whatever, then mention it. But she didn't really. And so that's why I reached out to her. Again, it was a lot of sort of veiled, not specific examples that she was bringing up. And so, I emailed her. Now, I have these emails, and I want people to know that I'm not going to read these emails on the show. And I thought about doing that, and then I thought, it's not really very flattering for, I don't think, Sarah Westall, anyway. It sort of shows her own, I'm not sure how I would characterize it. It shows an inability to respond to and or pay attention to what is brought to her attention. In fact, what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to link in the description below a Substack article that Sarah Westall herself wrote regarding Polly and these accusations that she brings up against Polly, and how basically, as she would put it, because this is the title of her article, cannibalizing the truth movement and attacking everyone. And then the subtitle was Not a Good Day. And then she puts out this meme at the very front that says, every day is a chance to be better. Now, again, I'm going to link this in the description below, and I'm not going to read it because I've read it, and I've read the comments. But what I also read was what Polly put out on her Twitter account, which is @FringeViews. And apparently this is her account, but she certainly, and it certainly seems like it, but she put out a text thread and text messages between her and Sarah Westall, where she's asking Sarah particular questions about the wellness company and the people she's interviewed and a few other things, and then Sarah's responses back. How this devolves, or evolves, I should say, over the course of time, is that Sarah Sarah's answers are so long-winded and so emotional and so I'm not sure how I would describe it. I would go so far as to say almost borderline incoherent at times, that it's very hard to view it as being objective in any way. And again, here's what this all stems from. This all stems from what happens when an individual is confronted with the fact that they might not have everything figured out. So, on Dave Janda's radio show, for example, and I should actually preface it by saying this. First of all, I know that a lot of this sounds really petty. It's like this back and forth pettiness about who said what, and, kind of like this grade school fighting nonsense. And it really kind of is that way. But instead of leaving well enough alone and just letting Polly do what she does, and understanding that Polly has been exposing these people for quite some time. This is not new. Polly's been going after the likes of Jordan Peterson and the Daily Wire and all of these other individuals who, again, are affiliated with the wellness company. The wellness company just happens to be one of the groups where they all get the promo codes and a little kickback from these supplements. But the much larger issue here is that we know who the enemy is, but at the exact same time, the enemy is deeper and far more pervasive in the so-called truth movement than clearly what Sarah Westall is willing to acknowledge. This again, ladies and gentlemen, is a perfect reason why I don't have guests on my show. And it's not because I don't like learning. And as you know, I do have guests on my show from time to time, but I'm rather selective about it because the individuals that I talk to are actual people. They're not affiliated with corporations. They're not affiliated with the military or government or whatever. I talk with parents, and I talk with homeschoolers, and I talk with the occasional student. And I've had two students on the show before, one from high school and one from Xavier University at the time. I've had Dr. Robin McCutcheon on, who, of course, is a college professor, and we talk about subjects on my show, again, regarding the bioweapons and the collapse of education and the entire layout of the entire university landscape in ways that perhaps other people don't. But when someone's show is all about talking with other people all of the time, instead of always doing their own individual investigations, when someone like Polly, that's what she does, which is why, you don't see Polly on other people's shows. It's not because she has something to hide. It's a personal preference, just like it's my personal preference to not really go on anybody's show either. I'm on Jesse James's show from time to time. I have been, a few times, and I've enjoyed it. And I like his show. I've also met him face to face. I gave him a 6-pack of beer. He gave me 2 dozen eggs, which was great. It was fantastic, which, by the way, Jesse, the eggs were amazing. They're huge, by the way, too. And my dog liked them also. But the point is that that's the separation in this entire landscape and in this war that is going on right now. That there are individuals who believe they have it all figured out, and sometimes when they swing for the fences, they think they've hit a grand slam when in fact the baseball's right behind them and they've missed. They have an interesting exchange back and forth, but the answers, again, that Sarah Westall provides are very long-winded when, again, Polly's just kind of asking a few basic questions. And then you see it devolve into this back and forth of, again, Sarah providing these huge, long questions and explanations and rationalizations, and it's just odd. So I would encourage people to go over to Sarah Westall's Substack and read this particular article. The problem, of course, also is that her second article about this particular subject regarding, again, the wellness company and again, the point that Polly has been making for a very long time, apparently longer than what Sarah Westall knows about, is that not everybody in the quote-unquote truth movement is being truthful. They're not all being honest. And there are endless reasons as to why that's the case, and I've been over them on my show also. So, if you go over there and you read that, I highly recommend it. Again, I'll link it in the description below, but like I said, the problem is her second article about it is behind a paywall. Well, again, my suggestion is that you make it free. If it's truthful and you have nothing to hide, why would you hide it behind a paywall? Just make it free for everybody. I don't charge anybody for my Substacks. All my content is free. If people want to donate, they can, but I give them that choice. I don't say you can't read XYZ, like the New York Times does, for example, and then say, well, in order to read the rest, you have to pay me. What's truthful about that? Again, that seems disingenuous to me. But I've always had that approach. I mean, that's the approach I've always taken. Because again, that's unfortunately why we are in the situation that we're in, is because certain information is being hidden from people. So let me get back to this, though, very quickly. Again, the whole reason that I reached out to Sarah in the first place was because I was interested as to what proof she had that Polly was engaging in some kind of, I don't know, uncouth dialogue with someone else back in 2016. And she sent me some things that, again, have more holes in it than Swiss cheese. But this, again, is what Sarah Westall was bouncing around audio shows talking about. And I thought to myself, wait a minute, there's no real hard evidence here of any wrongdoing on Polly's part. It's just a lot of name smearing and allegations. But then again, in the same breath, Sarah Westall says, well, if you're going to be a journalist, then you have to be ethical. Well, that's a bit hypocritical, isn't it? It's a bit hypocritical. So, again, the email exchange between Sarah Westall and myself devolved in the same way that the conversation between her and Polly devolved. I asked her very specific questions. She gave me back some answers. And then I responded in kind with my take on what she had sent me, which I read everything and I looked at everything. And here's basically what happened, again, without having, and I'm fully admitting, I don't have the full context of this either because you can't find it. It doesn't exist. So here's what apparently happened. Back in 2016, Polly was blogging about the subject of narcissism and the kinds of people that narcissists are and a number of other things. Having watched the video that she sent me, which is another person's take on Polly, so I mean, it's hearsay, which of course isn't admissible in a court of law, but either way, Sarah Westall's running on hearsay all of the time. And at least with this particular subject. And then in this particular video, though, it's an individual who apparently runs a help group for people who have been abused by narcissists. And so if I was to take a guess, and I'm guessing, having, again, watched Polly's videos in the past and known her history and the kinds of takes that she takes on things and the investigations that she engages in and the questions she asks. Polly openly states that at one point she was being either controlled or, abused by a narcissist or narcissists, plural. Because at one point in this video, she says that she tried to reach out to one of these groups or was affiliated with one of these so-called help groups, but they just wanted to keep Polly around. And then the topic that Polly briefly brings up, which you hear just a quick snippet of it because it's all edited from this third person's perspective. But she says, when I was affiliated with these people, they just wanted to keep me around, almost like they wanted more from me. And again, if I was to take a guess, I would say that the point that Polly was probably bringing up was that individuals who would run a narcissist abuse therapy group, who are apparently individuals who have been abused by narcissists, could actually be narcissists themselves. Now, is that unreasonable to actually think? No, of course not. That happens all of the time. And the example that I brought up to Sarah in these email exchanges was, it would be like, again, which is very common, individuals running an Alcoholics Anonymous group, and it's being run by either current or former alcoholics themselves. And to assume that there isn't some ulterior motive there among some of those groups is foolish. Because there very well could be, and there certainly are with many of these groups. So what Polly was doing was she was getting in the comments section of this particular group online, and she was making comments. And then, of course, this particular group and the people who run it sent Polly a cease and desist letter. Well, a cease and desist letter doesn't mean that you've broken a law. A cease and desist letter can be written by someone who thinks that their feelings are getting hurt. My feelings are getting hurt. I'm interpreting what you're saying as potentially being violent. I think that you're doing this. I think you're doing that. And then I'm going to hire a lawyer, allegedly, to write up a cease and desist letter, and then I'm going to send it to you so that you stop commenting because I don't like the comments you're making. Well, again, part of me says get a thicker skin. And then part of me says, okay, there's still no crime there. So again, the entire exchange was just hyper emotional and over emotional. And then Sarah went on, of course, those two radio shows, that podcast and Janda's show. And she said that Polly was making fun of an abuse victim. That's the wide brush she used. That she was making fun of this abuse victim. She was using this particular woman's words against Polly against her. That's what was happening. Again, it's basically this schoolyard sort of back and forth, petty nonsense. But the bigger point that I want to make is this, and this really is the largest point. If an individual is incapable of not wanting to investigate all subjects and numerous subjects, therein lies a problem. And just because someone else is investigating something that shoots a little too close to where you used to stand, it doesn't mean they're shooting at you. It means that, yes, guilt by association can have consequences. Again, what did Al Capone say? Al Capone said, "Be careful who your friends are and who you associate with. I would rather have 4 quarters than 100 pennies." He's right. That's important. But when people are interested in clicks and likes and views and subscribers and chasing the numbers and the money is the motive, or one of the hidden motives, even though Sarah Westall wouldn't admit to that, that right there, again, is part of the problem where a person loses objectivity and they become over-emotional. And as we know about the physiology of the brain, when the emotions take over, objectivity goes away. When the amygdala starts to fire, the frontal cortex shuts down. You can see this in endless examples. Again, I hate to bring it up again, but it's going to be, it's going to be a reference point for a while because it's a perfect example, because I did this on purpose to prove this point. Not that I was expecting the reaction that occurred, but during the Michigan school board meeting in Oxford, Michigan, that emotional reaction from all of those women proves that point. They didn't ask a question. They adjourned, they started yelling, and then they all left. That's not objectivity. So again, just because people are learning different things at a different pace than someone else doesn't mean that those people or that person is wrong. And what it also doesn't mean is that you get to go around and disparage this individual by making these allegations in the middle of a war when information and truthful information is what most of us are trying to seek. But what is clear is there's only so far in the truth movement, quote unquote, that people will go. And that right there is the point that Polly was making and does make with many presentations. Sarah Westall actually proved Polly's point in Sarah's response both to Polly and to me, which is that Sarah openly admitted there are subjects she's not that interested in. Now, she knows a great deal. She's a bright woman. She knows a great deal. She's talked with a number of people. She knows how bad things are. But the closer those questions come to people that you affiliate with or did affiliate with, that doesn't mean that that's when you're supposed to start getting defensive. That's when you're really supposed to start to say, wait a minute, this person over here might have a point. Perhaps I need to back off on the number of guests I have or the people I talk to, or instead of just, filling up a calendar with people to talk to on my so-called show, maybe I should do a little more vetting of these people. Not make excuses for not doing the vetting, but actually either, again, really vet them or not, and just not have them on at all. You see, when I talk with a parent, I don't have to do a whole lot of vetting. When I talk with a homeschooling family, I don't have to do a whole lot of vetting of these people. These people reach out to me. And just by their circumstances and just by their authenticity and their lack of being affiliated with these giant conglomerates, I know for a fact that I'm talking with someone who is authentic. There's no vetting that has to take place there, really. Then it just becomes a matter of what they know and what they don't know and what they believe to be true and what they believe to not be true. So, again, the name calling in again what Sarah Westall refers to as the truth movement. First of all, we don't call it that. We don't call it that. And the title of her article is Cannibalizing the Truth Movement and Attacking Everyone. That's a broad statement, and that's not true. First of all, we're not eating anybody, metaphorically or literally. We don't call it the truth movement, and we're not attacking everyone. Those are three words, three statements that are rather broad. That's not what's happening. We're going after individuals because we're still moving further down the battlefield in this war, and what we're recognizing is that there are people trying to control a wavelength of thought who don't want other people to know what's really going on. And those people are fair game. It doesn't make those people a part of your so-called truth movement. In fact, it makes those people far more suspicious in the fact that they all run in the same circles, get paid by the same people, protect one another no matter the cost, keep people out on purpose, only invite certain people in on purpose, which defines the term gatekeeper. That's where that comes from. So again, people shouldn't be afraid to learn new things. If I had to take a guess, I would just ask my audience and my listening audience this question. You know the things and the subjects that I bring up on my show. You know what they all are, all the terms, all of the history, all of it, okay? Because I go over it with regularity because it ties in with everything that we're covering here. Let me ask you this question. At face value, whether you've listened to Sarah Westall or not, and I've listened to her often enough to know what she knows and what she doesn't, and you can usually pick this kind of stuff out, is that, do you think that Sarah Westall talks about the same kinds of things that I do on her show? Having looked at her website before, she also has a radio show that airs out of Los Angeles. And she lives in Minneapolis, Minnesota, or in that general area. So, do you think she really brings up the things that I bring up on my show? Of course not. The question then becomes why? Is it because she doesn't know about it? Is it because she's afraid that she'll lose listeners? Is it because she's afraid she'll lose money? Is it because she's afraid that people will turn on her for one reason or another? See, that contradicts the entire word truth. If it says in the Bible, do not fear, over 365 times, then do not fear. That's not an accident. That's a giant on purpose. Don't be fearful. And don't be afraid to be wrong. I mean, hell, my audience knows this. I'm wrong all the time. And if I'm wrong about something, I go back and I correct it. Or I'll even start off the episode by saying, okay, I said this in the last episode. As it turns out, it's not correct. Or I said something in the last episode that turned out to not be right, and someone else has corrected me on it, or I found out myself that I was wrong, and so here it is. That happens. Everybody does that. It doesn't make me a quote-unquote bad person. It doesn't make me an unethical human, and it doesn't make me whatever else. That's not what it is. Again, if a person wants to have a conversation about ethics, and it's not a debate either. This is not debatable. You can't debate facts. There's just facts. But if a person wants to talk about ethics, of course, I would say walk in a person's shoes for a while and get a taste of it. But the real problem with ethical behavior right now is that these individuals, and it's not all of them, but it's certainly plenty of them in the so-called truth movement, happen to have an awful lot of attention on them, and it's not accidental. So asking about why it's not accidental is actually highly ethical. Because the conversations that they don't want to have seem suspiciously unethical. Let me give you an example. And I'll slowly sort of, again, start to move away from this, but I don't know if Sarah Westall knows about this either. But just because, again, Dr. Peter McCullough goes around saying what he says and doing what he's doing doesn't make him an ethical person. He's playing ball with some very dangerous people. So, guilt by association is a thing. It does matter. This is directly from Charles Wright 1, the number 1, .substack.com. And I've read from this person's Substack before, and they, of course, claim to have been in the medical industry themselves for a number of years. But their Substack channel is titled C's Newsletter, and this article was written by them on March 18th. And it says it's titled the following: Open letter to Arizona State Senator Janae Shamp, I'm saying her name right, on the testimony of Peter McCullough. Here's what it says. Arizona Senator Janae Shamp held a hearing to hospital protocols at an ironically titled Novel Coronavirus Southwestern Intergovernmental Committee on Friday, March 15th of 2024. This article constitutes an open letter to Senator Shamp on the false narrative presented to her committee by Peter McCullough and the conflicting financial interests of McCullough, which may have prevented him from telling, quote, the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, unquote, to the Arizona state senators. Senator Champ opened the hearing with a moment of silence for a friend who was killed by hospital protocols. They said the following, quote, Senator Champ said, "I think most people know me around here as the nurse who was fired for not getting the vaccination. But today I'm also a friend of someone who recently died from the ongoing COVID-19 hospital protocols that I was told last year were not being utilized anymore." Unquote. Then they said this, quote, "I would like to do a moment of silence for my dear friend and all the COVID-19 hospital protocol victims," unquote. Then they said this, quote, Hospitals across America continue to medically gaslight and ignore the evidence presented through various congressional and state-led hearings. This astonishingly flippant attitude has prioritized expensive drugs like remdesivir while banning more effective and less costly treatments," unquote. Then they said this. Again, this whole article is their open letter to this senator. They said, "Senator Champ, I would like to make you aware of the financial conflicts of interest of Peter McCullough. I will also point out some issues that I have with Mr. McCullough's testimony. Before 2016 through 2022, Mr. McCullough received payments from numerous pharmaceutical companies, including Sanofi US Services Inc., AstraZeneca UK Limited, Janssen Pharmaceuticals Inc., Boehringer Ingelheim International, whatever, Novartis Pharmaceutical Corporation, Bayer Healthcare Pharmaceuticals Inc., Amarin Pharma Inc., Nova Nordisk Inc., Merck, Sharp, and Dome LLC, GE Healthcare, Amgen Inc., Regeneron Healthcare Solutions Inc., and others. The payments to Mr. McCullough from Boehringer Ingelheim Pharmaceuticals in particular represent a conflict of interest for Mr. McCullough in properly reporting the nature of death in hospitals. He said in fiscal year 2022, Boehringer Ingelheim Pharmaceuticals Inc. was the highest bidder for Mr. McCullough's services, described as either speaking or consulting services. Also in 2022, Boehringer Ingelheim Pharmaceuticals Inc. made a large payment to Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center, 330 Brookline Avenue, Boston, Massachusetts, 02215. Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center was the second largest recipient of payments from Boehringer Ingelheim Pharmaceuticals Inc. behind the Hospital of University of Pennsylvania. A large amount of their ventilated patients developed acute respiratory distress syndrome, or ARDS, at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center by March of 2020. Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center was killing their patients and collecting payments from the government via this method. Dr. McCullough has common funding source with Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center in Boehringer Ingelheim Pharmaceuticals Inc., and perhaps has a financial incentive to describe these deaths as failures, quote-unquote, instead of homicides, quote-unquote. Mr. McCullough and others closely associated with him have advanced a notion that early treatment, quote-unquote, saves lives. This is extremely poor and incorrect interpretation of data. This is an extremely poor and incorrect interpretation of data, it said. These statistics, they quote, compare mortality rates of people receiving, quote, early treatments, unquote, such as ivermectin, to the death rates resulting from hospital protocols. These studies do not compare death rates of ivermectin to death rates of COVID, quote unquote. You cannot call a death that results from giving a known deadly drug remdesivir, loading them up with opioids, and ventilating them, causing bacterial pneumonia, renal failure, along with denying these patients food, water, and basic hygiene, a quote-unquote COVID death caused by a virus. You cannot use these homicide claims to claim that, quote, early treatments save lives, unquote, by comparison. Every study that compares things that do not kill patients to hospital protocols that do kill patients and interprets the data to read, quote, these treatments could have saved lives, quote unquote, is based on an incorrect interpretation of the data. I hope that you can accept this extremely simple statistical concept. The next time someone says something saved lives by comparison, ask how those other people really died. Early treatments such as ivermectin do not kill patients. Hospitals and vaccines do. It's that simple. COVID is not killing anyone anywhere. Senator Champ, I recommend that you call other expert witnesses to testify before your committee who will tell you the truth. Dr. Michael Yeadon is now on record, and there was never a viral COVID pandemic, quote unquote. Sasha Latipova has said that it is not possible to engineer viruses that spread person to person, the manner in which the alleged virus was said to have spread. Doctors Mark and Sam Bailey have debunked the fraudulent and unscientific methods to create in silico SARS-CoV-2 virus sequence, which the meaningless PCR test tested for. SARS-CoV-2 is a fabrication, any way you want to look at it. There are numerous medical uses for ivermectin. The methods by which ivermectin worked to save falsely labeled COVID patients, quote unquote, lives needs to be studied. Although it seems clear that the antibiotic effect of ivermectin were the main reason for the sharp reduction in mortality among hospitalized COVID patients, quote unquote. They go on and they say, Mary Talley Bowden reported that a high rate of hospitalized COVID patients, quote unquote, survived after receiving ivermectin under court order. All who were denied ivermectin by a court died. These case studies, should show how ivermectin saved their lives. RDS, created by Beth Israel Medical Center and other ICUs across the country, is a blood clotting condition based on circulating endotoxin or bacteria. Ivermectin is likely beneficial in treating ventilator-induced ARDS. Recent studies have shown the extremely high rate of bacterial pneumonia in ventilated COVID patients, quote unquote. Ivermectin would have worked to treat bacterial pneumonia. Ivermectin works, but it works to reverse the damage caused by hospitals, not COVID, quote unquote. Mr. McCullough started his presentation with a false and fear-based narrative of an engineered virus that spread around the world. At the 8-minute mark, they said, McCullough stated the following, quote, COVID-19 illness and the vaccine are very similar in that they expose patients to a protein on the surface of the virus. The spicule, if you will, the spine of the surface of the virus, called the spike protein. This spike protein was intentionally engineered in a Chinese biosecurity lab in Wuhan, China. The spike protein is not a natural protein. It's been modified by mankind in a joint U.S.-Chinese collaboration that took years to create SARS-CoV-2. It's now fully acknowledged through the House Select Coronavirus Investigation Committee in Washington that SARS-CoV-2 was created in the Chinese biosecurity lab in Wuhan, China. Then they said, this individual writing this said, Mr. McCullough continued to call the use of remdesivir a failure, quote unquote, in response to the mystical SARS-CoV-2 virus. This goes along with McCullough's larger notion that other early treatments, quote unquote, could have worked better at fighting the mythical virus. The reality is that remdesivir was part of a deadly protocol that intentionally killed patients. At the 4750 mark, McCullough stated the following, quote, well, there are certainly manuscripts published from around the world regarding hospital outcomes and the use of remdesivir. The one way to think about hospitalization is that someone dying of COVID-19 in the hospital is a failure. It's a failure that the hospital was supposed to save lives. There shouldn't have been a single death in the hospital. That should have been deemed from Americans, it says. He goes on and said, the observation that there was almost no deaths of people at home with COVID is startling. You'd think that if this was indeed truly an illness with a natural history and a fatal outcome, there would be people dead at home. You would just think that's the case. One cannot find manuscripts or reports of that in the United States because virtually all of the deaths occurred in the hospitals. So the question on the table is, what occurred at the hospitals that failed to save lives? And then Charles Wright continues and says, it is clearly illogical to state that hospitals failed to save lives, quote unquote, when you also know damned good and well that, quote, there were almost no deaths of people at home, unquote, as he also said. This is called mass homicide. For remuneration, Senator Champ, not a failure, quote unquote. Hospitals were following protocols subsidized by the government for each positive and meaningless COVID-19 PCR test, for each dose of remdesivir, each person ventilated, and for each person they killed in their hospitals with quote-unquote COVID on the death certificate. Hospitals received compensation from the federal government. Peter McCullough is receiving payments from pharmaceutical companies that also pay these hospitals, Senator Champ, and I respectfully submit this information for your consideration. Charles Wright. And then it finishes. And then they have all of the references to comments that they made with direct links to them. 10 of them, as a matter of fact. Again, he's correct. There are half-truths in what Peter McCullough says, but therein lies the much larger problem. I would go so far as to say, what's worse, a full-blown lie or a half-truth? Me personally, I would go so far as to say that a half-truth is far more dangerous. Because with a full-blown lie, yes, you're still going to trick a great deal of people, but it's going to be far more easy to detect a full-blown lie as opposed to a half-truth, because with a hint of truth in there, or even 50% truth, you're bringing along a whole lot of people with you. Far more, I think, than what you would tell or bring along with you if you just told a flat-out lie. That's why, again, in dialogues between people back and forth on particular subjects, sometimes there are individuals who only understand half-truths, or they follow people and associate with people who are engaging in half-truths. Well, then that's not the truth movement, is it? It's a half-truth movement. And that's a problem. And to bring it back to, again, Amazing Polly and Sarah Westall, I would openly say again, just because someone is researching something that you know nothing about doesn't mean that it's a psyop. And just because individuals are out there, and there are many of us who have been going after the likes of Peter McCullough and Robert Malone and Simone Gold and endless other individuals, when we go after these people, it doesn't mean we're all a part of some government psyop, as Sarah Westall likes to think and likes to say. That's a rationalization. That's not objective at all. So I'm going to end it there with that, with this particular subject. I don't want to read these emails that was an exchange between me and Sarah Westall, because frankly, it's not flattering. It's just not flattering. I brought a lot of information to bear with Sarah, and I received very little back that was coherent. And it's disappointing, but it just shows again that she's very concerned about associations, but she doesn't understand that there are people out there also who have good intentions for her and are actually warning her. Polly tried to warn her about the wellness company and the people that she's even had on her show that she's talked with. I tried to warn her again about Dr. Dave Janda just specifically saying, again, regarding a very specific point, and I don't have a beef with Dr. Janda. I could I could care less. But he's being disingenuous when he says that he was always telling people to not take the shots. He was taking a very middle-of-the-road approach. And I've brought the quote up before on the show, but Dr. Janda would say throughout the first half of 2021 on his radio show, every week, he was saying, I'm not telling you to take the jab. I'm not telling you to not take the jab. I'm telling you to get informed consent from your doctor. Well, what's destructive about that sentence is that it's broken up into 3 parts, and 2/3 of it are wrong. And 2/3 of it are bad advice. In fact, 2/3 of it back then was deadly advice. So if he's saying, I'm not telling you to take the jabs, okay, good. He should have said, don't ever take it. You can't trust this. Don't ever take it. Just take a hard line on it. But he didn't do that. And I brought it up on my show back then. That was a long time ago. 3 years ago. But I remember that. And then at the exact same time, the second thing, of course, is he's saying, I'm not telling you to not take it. Well, that's a deadly decision. That's deadly advice. And then when he says, I'm asking you to get informed consent from your doctor, ladies and gentlemen, it was the quote-unquote informed consent from doctors back then that was killing people. Because they were all giving, by and large, they were all giving the quote-unquote same advice. That's why I said what I said at the school board meeting in August of 2021. I took hard lines on things to drop bombs on the people who weren't taking hard lines on things. It had to be done. It had to be said. My largest regret is I didn't do it sooner. But therein lies the issue. Half-truths are far more dangerous, in my opinion. They're dangerous. Again, the irony of, as I've brought up numerous times before, the so-called school environment that we were all raised in, which told us to not trust strangers, don't talk to strangers, don't listen to strangers, don't do what strangers tell you to do, don't take drugs, and don't fall for peer pressure, actually did all of those things. And they weren't the only ones. It was society. All of society was telling people, listen to strangers, you can trust them, take drugs, and fall for peer pressure, and buckle to the peer pressure. And we're going to do all of those things in a way that society has never seen before, ever. Not certainly regarding medicine, quote unquote, anyway. But man, just don't attack people for knowing more than what you might know. That's all. Don't do that. That's not nice. It's not, it's not ethical. If a person has a hard time understanding something, well, that usually means they have more to learn. But we also know the behavior of individuals who are unfortunately not awake at all. That's why, the quote-unquote awakening process is on a spectrum. I'm still on that spectrum too. Excuse me, but we're all on that spectrum to varying degrees. And as I've said before, there are litmus tests that you can give to people to see what they will respond to and what they will not. It will tell you how far they're willing to go and how much they know. Again, has Sarah Westall seen Europa: The Last Battle? Has she seen the documentary The Lobby? Does she know that the Jewish lobby controls America and they are arguably our number one enemy? Does she mention this on her shows? Has she read any Q posts? I know Dr. Dave Janda makes fun of Q posts and says, trust the plan is all bullshit and you can't trust the plan. And do you trust the plan? And Sarah goes on his show and says, no, there is no plan. Blah, 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 blah. Well, then that just means you haven't read any Q posts. That's all. It means you didn't read the Q posts. That was a purposeful plan to wake up the masses across the world, and it worked. It was remarkably effective. We didn't have to listen to your shows to wake up. We could just read Q posts. So, being disingenuous and trying to take credit for things that is frankly, I just think it's all unnecessary. It's not an ego measuring contest. It's not about clicks, likes, subscribers, and how long you've done something. If years of experience were the measurement of ethical behavior or professionalism, then, ladies and gentlemen, Nancy Pelosi would be the greatest congresswoman in the history of Congress. It's like the individuals who say, well, I'm a parent, so I know. Or I'm related to these people who have this profession, so I know. If being a parent was the default be-all, end-all, that you're an expert at something, in particular raising children, well then, Jeffrey Dahmer's parents would win Parent of the Year award. So that goes out the window. It's illogical. It's sophistry, as a matter of fact. That's what it is. It's specifically called sophistry. And there are endless people in the so-called truth movement who use sophistry as a defense. You can't be sophomoric and defend yourself at the same time logically. It just doesn't work that way. I've never called myself an expert at anything. I'm certainly not. In fact, I'll tell you what, I'll end, I really will end with this. And this is the point that I made in the last episode. And it was part of the exchange in these emails that I had with Sarah Westall, which was, I explained to her how the foundation of the pharmaceutical industry is built on the lie of virology. This is the basis for all of the lying that we have experienced throughout this entire time, certainly the last 4 years, and as we know, the last 200 plus, since the invention of vaccination or inoculation. Certainly, of course, from the mid-1800s to the early 1900s with the control of the medical industry by the Rockefellers and their medical schools and the medical companies and so on and so forth. But it's not the Rockefellers, it's the Jewish moneylenders. They're the ones that control all of this. Rockefeller was a pawn in the Jewish lobby money-controlling moneylender scheme. He was a poor man. He had no money. But they gave him all this money, and then they told him what to do, and he did it. And as a result of all of that, that's why we are where we are now. So unfortunately, we have individuals in the so-called truth movement who aren't advancing the truth all the way for a variety of reasons, most of which always, unfortunately, boils down to money. They're more interested in money, and they're more interested in the attention that comes with money and then the money that comes with attention. That's remarkably unfortunate. But the visual example that I brought up in the last episode is going to remain true, and I would encourage people to use this with the people that they are around if they're interested in, again, creating a bit of a metaphor, so to speak, is that the pharmaceutical industry is a skyscraper. It's a skyscraper. And it sits on the lie of virology as its foundation. Groups like the Wellness Company and the so-called truth movement and or freedom doctors and or America's frontline doctors, it's not that they do everything bad. It's that all they've done, and some of it is good and some of it is not, but what they've done is they've thrown a brick through one of the windows of the pharmaceutical skyscraper. That's fine. And that's not a bad thing. The problem is they don't go after the foundation. They don't get inside the building and then ask questions inside of the building, make their way down to the basement and go, holy shit, this right here is the problem. That's what they don't do. But that's what people like Polly does. That's what I do. That's what a lot of us out here do. A lot of people are on Substack telling the truth about the virology lie. Unfortunately, even though Sarah Westall openly admitted to me that she is aware of terrain theory, it's not a theory, but either way, I pointed her directly to the historic proof that shows that viruses are false. And then she fires back and she says, well, you think it's 100% false, so that's that then as far as you're concerned. And I was like, this is not my opinion. I don't have the luxury of an opinion. Not when it comes to something like that, that's easily provable. And then again, she openly admitted that while she doesn't disagree fully with that, she doesn't think that it's that important. And that to me tells me that that's as far as she'll go. And that's a problem. Because kicking the can down the road is why we are where we are now. Because there's always these groups that show up that steal the storyline, so to speak. They tell half-truths, and then they just keep profiting on down the line. When there are those of us out here who aren't trying to profit from anything and are just telling the truth and looking for that wherever it is, regardless of what rock gets turned over. And as we all know, that includes looking in the mirror. I think it was Plato who said something about self-improvement is the first place that a person has to go. You got to look at yourself first. What is it that you believe? What is it that you're doing? As an individual. And then is it possible that you have it wrong? Again, much like the way that Sarah Westall got very defensive and very emotional with Polly, she got very emotional and very defensive with me in these emails, which I thought I was being very professional. In fact, my tone as I type was typically like this. I'm not bashing on the keyboard, and yelling and screaming. I'm asking legit questions, and then I'm telling her about a different perspective from someone that she's never even talked to, even though she recognized or acknowledged very quickly in a small email to me that she did see my school board speech from back in August of 2021, and enjoyed it. Okay, well, thanks. I mean, great. But the fact is that I'm just another person trying to give you another perspective. And, a simple thank you would be okay rather than getting over emotional and getting defensive. Because, in fact, that's the point that Polly was making with the wellness company. You reach out to them to ask them questions about their affiliations and what they're doing, and they don't respond. Sarah at least responded to Polly. Unfortunately, Sarah didn't like what the answers that Polly was providing, which is why Sarah then became defensive. And then again, not only became defensive, but, rationalized particular things and dismissed other things and pled ignorant on a number of things. And perhaps she was. Again, I don't know. I can't jump into the minds of these people as they're having a conversation. But to blindly believe again that everybody in this branding referred to as the truth movement, as I said earlier, we don't say that. no one says that who's really being honest. That's a branding. That's a tagline that an advertiser would have for someone in the interest of making money. That's not the point. It's just not the point. If an individual cannot hold multiple points of view in their mind at one time and then sift through them and then arrive at objective logical conclusions. It just means that emotion has taken over and they're incapable of arriving at the stone cold truth. I name dropped a bunch of people to Sarah Westall to encourage her to ask herself the question, why do you think those so-called freedom doctors don't talk with other doctors like Dr. Thomas Cowan or Dr. Lee Merritt or Dr. Larry Palevsky and endless others, frankly? I mean, there's another woman, I'm going to get her name wrong. I want to say it's Dr. Sam Bailey, if I'm not mistaken. She's put together, I think with someone else, another book about the lie of virology. Yet another one. There are endless books about this, but they're not talking to her either. Why? I came across a picture too the other day with Dr. Ryan Cole. It's in the war video. And Dr. Robert Malone, and they're embracing one another for a photograph, and they're both wearing neckties that have pictures of a quote-unquote coronavirus on it. That stereotypical CGI image of a quote-unquote virus all over both of their neckties. These aren't guys that want to hear about virology being a lie. This is why Robert Malone gets real tight-lipped around Tom Rentz. He gets tight-lipped around Tom Rentz because Tom Rentz has proof that this was all done on purpose. Robert Malone goes, I don't have any proof of that. But Robert Malone also doesn't ask for the proof, does he? Robert Malone's too busy trying to sue people for asking questions of Robert Malone with ridiculous amounts of lawsuits, asking for ridiculous amounts of money, like Mr. and Mrs. Dr. Peter Breggin, which Renette Sunham has been over at length before also, attempting to sue them for $200-some-odd million along with Dr. Jane Ruby because they were asking questions about his affiliations with individuals. Who does that? Who sues somebody for that amount of money when somebody's asking a question? But see, Robert Malone's a part of the truth movement, I thought. He's a part of the freedom doctors, right? Wearing the white lab coats, standing in Washington, D.C., getting their pictures taken. Half-truths. Half-truths are way more dangerous. And regarding the lawsuit with the Breggins that Malone had, as it turns out, just a quick little follow-up on that, because I've brought that up on the show before, it's fallen through completely. In fact, the judge who was overseeing the whole thing basically looked at the lawyers for Malone and were like, what are you doing? This is they have freedom of speech. They're asking questions of an individual and their background. They have freedom of speech to do so. There's no proof that Robert Malone's losing money because these individuals are asking questions or even making the occasional allegation. Not a crime. Not a crime. There's always more to learn. Always. I said this, back when I was in college. I mean, I said it a long, long time ago, and I noticed it when I was a K-12 student. The worst teacher is always the one who refuses to be the ever-learning student. If you cease being a student, you cease being a teacher. It's over then. Then you get into this habit of just doing the same thing over and over and over again, and you never, ever want to hear an alternative point of view. That's why students in school are disciplined for challenging teachers. The teacher could be dead wrong, and the student could be 100% right. But if the student questions the teacher or challenges the teacher, there's actual consequences for that. Think about that for a minute. That's remarkably destructive. It's not that the student is always going to be right, but what it proves is that the teacher isn't always going to be right either just because they're at the front of the class. And just because the wellness company puts themselves at the front of the class, so to speak, that doesn't make them more knowledgeable than someone like myself. Doesn't make them more knowledgeable than you. Again, if it's an information war, which it most certainly is, then people have to be able to sift through multiple pieces of information from multiple points of view at the same time. And not everybody can do that. That's why I firmly recommend people go back and they watch that documentary, which is available on my website. I have the links right on there under the medical documents tab, where I list documentaries and books related to the COVID lie. The documentary, The Viral Delusion. It's at least 4 parts. It's exquisite. It's exquisite. And when you're watching The Viral Delusion, when you're watching that, I've seen it twice, and I almost want to go back and watch it a third time, and I really do, because it's that good. When you go back and you watch it, what you're going to find is you should immediately ask yourself, why are these doctors not on the old TV? Why are the so-called truth movement freedom doctors not talking with these doctors that are in this documentary? Isn't that interesting? There's multiple dimensions here, and there's multiple wavelengths of thought that exist. That's why, again, individuals who associate with large conglomerates of people, when someone does something that's bad, you're going to get swooped up in that, whether you like it or not. That's one of the consequences of association. It always has been. That's why people like myself leave school environments, because we don't like what's going on in the environment, because it reflects poorly on us. Because when you're out in public, for example, and you say, well, here's where I work, people out in public might know more about that working environment than you do. And they might have more to share. I've brought up those stories before when I was a school teacher. I was talking with parents who knew more about the corrupt school district that I was working for than I did. And I would sit and I would listen to them and I'd go, holy shit, like, these people aren't lying. I'm seeing bad behavior, but I had no idea that this was happening with this person over here, that this group used to do this over here, whatever else. I mean, it works like that in every facet of society. So to close off one's mind to what's really going on from lots of different angles in a war, that's not a survivable characteristic. That's not a good take here. So unfortunately, again, there's lots of people out there clamoring for likes and clicks and comments and thumbs up and cash. I'm not one of those people. I'm not interested in that. I think, frankly, that gives me a bit of an advantage because it allows me to see multiple things without being blinded by something or having an ulterior motive of some kind. I've certainly never had one of those. So that's my 2 cents. But there you go. Sorry for the long explanation. It just deserved it. I think Polly does good work. I'm certain Sarah does good work too. I do good work also. Lots of people do. I just don't close my mind off to learning new things because I haven't heard it before. Or again, because I was standing too close to a giant corporation and a giant group of people who all say the same things and travel in the same packs and, birds of a feather flock together. That's where that phrase comes from. And as you've heard me say a million times, and here comes 1,000,001, the George Patton quote, when everybody's thinking alike, someone's not thinking. It's an issue. So there you go. Okay. I have some other education news, and this is big. And I have some audio to play. And this is an actual old revisitation of a very old story that was brought up on this show by the great Vanessa Hurst. Vanessa Hurst went after the Nelson County superintendent a long time ago, back in 2021, when she was on the show again, at least, I want to say 8 or 9 times. And we were going after, again, I'm saying this as a reminder to anybody, again, new to the show or anybody who remembers those episodes, but we had numerous conversations about what the superintendent was doing, of course, all the mask-wearing policies and 1,000 other things. The misappropriation of money was certainly one of them. Ethics, just general ethics, a lot of nepotism, hiring your favorites, only hiring, again, the individuals who go along with the stereotypical communist line. And then there was another aspect of this too, among endless others, but I remember another aspect of it that had to do with their sort of school to work program and how basically they were allowing students to go and work at McDonald's all day long while they were also school students in the school themselves. So it was, I forget exactly what they called it, but it was something like their job training thing. It was some job training aspect of what the school district was claiming was the greatest thing since sliced bread, when clearly it wasn't. So now what's happened is their superintendent, Wes Bradley, has been fired. Again, this is a good thing. The irony of this, and this right here should also show you the depths of the brainwashing, are the number of parents who showed up to this school board meeting where he was fired by the school board, and they're applauding Wes Bradley and supporting Wes Bradley. Frankly, I couldn't actually believe it. But I do remember Vanessa Hurst specifically bringing up how there were a number of individuals who just loved Wes Bradley and what he was doing, trying to make the best of a terrible situation and blah, blah, blah. Again, the guy comes from the same pool of superintendents that they all come from. They're all communists. They're not going to tell you that. But that's how they've been trained. That's why they all do the same things. That's why nothing improves. That's why their default backstop excuse is, or I should say rationalization for something happening, is that they wanted the best for students, and that's all they wanted, and that's all they care about is what is best for students. Well, that's not true. Never has been. These people make money hand over fist at the expense of children, because children aren't being told the truth in school. I'm going to play this audio in a minute, which comes from YouTube, regarding the firing of Wes Bradley. But this was sent to me by a resident of the county, not Vanessa Hurst. But I would like to again talk with this individual and talk with the individual that they referenced, who they're related to, because there's clearly more going on here than what meets the eye, because there always is. So this particular article was from WHAS11.com, and it was titled, "Judge Keeps Lid on New Details Revealed in Lawsuit Against Nelson County School Board." It says the information includes more than 1,000 emails and over 100 text messages sent on board members' personal devices. Now, clearly, again, I don't know the specifics of this and whether there's actual wrongdoing or not, but the timing of this, of course, a day or so around or after Wes Bradley's firing is suspicious. I think that goes without saying. It says, Bardstown, Kentucky, Nelson County Forward, a group of parents in the community argue the Nelson County Board of Education violated Kentucky's open meetings law. On Friday, the group attorney, Matthew Height, said information gathered during these legal proceedings could be useful for the Kentucky Department of Education's interim commissioner as she decides on whether or not the board's removal of Superintendent Wes Bradley goes through. According to Height, that information included more than 1,000 emails and over 100 text messages sent on board members' personal devices. However, Nelson County Judge Mark Thurman ruled those documents would stay out of public view for now. Height wanted some of that information to reach KDE's interim commissioner before April 5th deadline, deciding the superintendent's fate. Previously, he asked the judge to intervene and prevent any action against him, but the judge denied it. Quote, "There's a difference between that and what's actually before the court," Judge Thurman said, which is that the actions should be voidable because of a violation of open meetings. Height believes the texts are proof of a violation, but can't reveal their contents because of an executive protective order on the records. It says, quote, "There's a smoking gun in the hands of the people who decided to end the superintendent's contract," he said. It's evidence he thinks will prove the board conducted public business in private, which, of course, you're not allowed to do. But they do it all the time. I mean, let's be honest. City councils do it all the time. School boards do it all the time. It's disgusting, but that's the way that they operate. It goes on and says, regardless of merit, the defense wants to keep the documents contained since the court case is in the discovery phase. It goes on here, and it almost wraps up, and it says they should not be used by the plaintiffs, so says this Lindsay Porter, or the public, to be used for other purposes, such as, at a minimum, providing them to the Commissioner of Education. Another defense attorney, Kevin Charlson, worries where the records may end up. Quote, it is not to be posted publicly on Facebook, commented on Facebook, and it is not to be emailed to legislators, to KDE, to what have you, Charlson said. Says the judge and the separate defense attorney argued the commissioner could probably obtain those records anyway if she wished. Quote, two, as part of the investigation, seek the records, she'd be free to do that, said attorney Jake Thompson. Says despite the commissioner's decision, the Nelson County Forward victory in this lawsuit would reverse Superintendent Bradley's removal. The case's next hearing is scheduled for March 28th. Thurmond set a trial date for August 1st of 2024. This is huge. I mean, something's going on here, and that's putting it mildly. Something big is really going on here, and it's beyond bizarre. So here's the YouTube video from a few days back, about a week or so ago, where Wes Bradley was removed. So give this a listen in 3, 2, 1.
Yelling and screaming tonight as the Nelson County School Board tonight votes to remove the popular superintendent. The special meeting was called by the Board of Education there to talk about the future of Wes Bradley. Over 100 people showed up in support of the educator. WHS 1119's Alex Dieterer and photojournalist Addie Hill report from Nelson County.
An angry room full of parents, educators, students ushered out by law enforcement. A crowd against the Nelson County Board of Education's decision to remove Superintendent Wes Bradley from his position during a special meeting. Tracy Bowling, the only no vote. The board went into executive session for over an hour, but the room stayed full and vocal.
Wesley Adam Bradley, the current superintendent of the Nelson County School District, be removed for cause by roll call vote, and that his current contract with the Board of Education be terminated.
Board member Amanda Deaton listed 6 reasons for Bradley's removal, including failure of leadership and engaging in conduct that's resulted in a majority of the board losing trust in him.
Of engaging in conduct that has created and promoted division and dissension within the district. Working relationships have been severely and irreparably damaged.
Bradley remained quiet. He became controversial with the board during discussions of their plan to merge the 2 high schools. It made him popular with parents and students. After the vote, he shared his hopes for Nelson County moving forward.
Firstly, I just want to share gratitude with all the educators across Nelson County schools. Really proud of the work that continues in our schools. And we also, over the next month, it's important that this doesn't become a distraction from student learning. I think that the key piece in all this is none of this should take away from our students. At the end of the day, we're working in the best interest of students, and we'll continue to do that no matter what the process entails.
Jessica Hogue with NC Forward said she and the rest of the group will continue to seek transparency from the board and keep the focus on the students.
We do not agree with the 4 board members that have made this decision. We also do not feel that this will stand.
The board members left quickly and did not give any comments. In Nelson County, Alex Dieterer, the WHAS 1119 on your side.
Like I said, there are things going on there that I can't comprehend. I clearly don't have the full picture, and I'm not even going to begin to act like I do. What I will say is this. I find it continuously sad, as this is a rather predictable response from me, that these individuals are clamoring for government to be their friend. That they're consistently sending their children to these environments, not knowing that there's an entire universe that exists of children who can teach themselves. So they show up to these meetings, they yell at a school board, about a decision that they're making when in fact the parents doing the yelling at the school board might not even have the full picture at hand. And then, of course, they're all of a sudden believing Wes Bradley, who they don't ever want to believe is hiding anything from anybody. I mean, the whole thing is just like I said at the beginning. It's all half-truths. It's half-truths, majority lies, some lies, unknown information, and then a bunch of emotion and people reacting on something that there's no way they have the full picture of. But wow, I mean, wow, indeed. A lot of lawsuits and court hearings over, again, text messages and communications about either Wes Bradley or, other individuals associated with the district, allegedly. I mean, yeah, I don't know what else to add because, again, I don't have the full picture. I just knew that when I saw this and when this was sent to me, that it wasn't surprising because, frankly, it was a shit show there back in 2021 and in 2020. So it blowing up the way that it's blown up now is rather predictable, regardless of the circumstances. This is what happens in this business. This is why the business is not ethical. It's not ethical for a variety of reasons, but this right here is certainly one of them. Everybody goes around one another lying and telling half-truths on a constant basis, and then before you know it, by the time that a certain amount of time has passed, everything just blows up straight to hell and everybody wonders why and gets mad based on their half-truths. It's astounding. Again, I can't comment on it because I don't know specifically what was going on there, but interesting nonetheless. Again, seeing Wes Bradley remain calm while losing his job isn't unusual because, as I've said in the past, being an ex-superintendent isn't always a bad place to be. You end up with a huge payout usually. You walk away with a copious amount of cash. And then at the exact same time, what happens to you as a superintendent? Well, it's rather simple. You go back into the superintendent's pool. And then you get sifted around and tossed around, and before you know it, you're maybe teaching in a different state, maybe you're teaching in a different county, certainly in a different district, at multiple levels. Maybe you go back to being a building principal. Maybe you go back to being a superintendent somewhere else. Maybe you go back into the classroom. Not likely. Maybe they go into higher education and become an administrator. The trash always gets passed in this business. It's the way that it works. So there you go. I think that's a victory for those people and certainly that area, whether they know it or not. But that's just my 2 cents based on the things that Vanessa Hurst told me about Wes Bradley and me observing his behavior and listening to him talk. He's a very calm con artist. He's got a tone about him that is suspicious. So there you go. There's also this story, and again, this is a follow-up from the Crumbly trial. As I think I mentioned in the last episode, the parents who are associated, of course, who had children there who were killed, they, of course, were seeking justice regarding the particular school employees who, of course, had direct information and knew what was going on with Ethan Crumbly, and were actually the last ones in possession of the gun and Ethan's backpack before the murders took place. Well, as it turns out, the parents were lied to by the prosecutor's office yet again. Again, the constant lying and manipulation, and then people consistently trying to believe government, only to have government stab you in the back repeatedly, and then eventually they just stab you in the chest while you're looking right at them. It blows me away that people continue to trust government. But this was sent to me by Jesse James, and it was from the Detroit Free Press, titled, "Oxford High School Officials Were Assured They Wouldn't Be Prosecuted in Mass Shooting." This was from a few days ago. It says, with the shooter and his parents now convicted, the families of the Oxford High School shooting victims say a fourth culprit still must be held accountable for the deaths of their children, the school. It says, as one grieving parent put it, within an hour of James Crumbly being convicted of involuntary manslaughter, quote, "It's time for the school to pony up." Another said, quote, we need to start focusing on the school and its failures, the things they didn't want to admit to," unquote. It says, but no school official will ever be held criminally responsible for the 2021 mass shooting that killed 4 students and injured 7 others, including a teacher. That's partially because Oakland County Prosecutor Karen McDonald gave multiple school employees who drew scrutiny over the decisions involving the shooter's assurances that she would not prosecute them. Those assurances came during interviews held early on as she built their historic case against James and Jennifer Crumbley, according to multiple sources who spoke to the Free Press on condition of anonymity to preserve professional relationships. You see what you see what this is here? This is government circling the wagons around government to then protect themselves and one another against parents. That's the war. It's government against us. And the more that we affiliate with government, the worse it gets. And the more that people continue to put their trust in government, the worse it gets. People have to remove themselves from government. If government is too big, which no one would disagree with, again, all the regulations and all the paperwork and all the laws and all the this and the that, if government is so large, what people don't seem to understand is their lack of participation shrinks it. It's the only thing that makes it go away. But this is difficult for people to understand. And I don't know, I know why. It's brainwashing, but either way, that's the issue at hand here. It says, unlike formal immunity agreements, which must be disclosed, the assurances did not have to be revealed to the Crumbley's defense attorneys. The Oakland County Prosecutor's Office on Saturday vehemently denied the assertions. Quote, any suggestion that any school employee was offered immunity or protection from prosecution based on anything other than the facts is completely false, and we will take issue with any suggestion otherwise, said a statement from Chief Assistant Prosecutor David Williams. 2 of these school employees, the sources said, signed what is known as a Katzagar or proffer, I'm saying that right, proffer, letters, which protect witnesses who talk to the government during investigations from having what they say during those talks used against them. These 2 employees, of course, are the school counselor Sean Hopkins and the former dean of students Nicholas E. Jack, who talked with the shooter and his parents during a pivotal meeting on the morning of the shooting when they allowed the teenager to remain in school despite receiving multiple alerts about his behavior in the 24 hours before the massacre. The most troubling warning, which prompted the meeting of the parents, involved the teen's drawing of a picture that included a gun, a human being bleeding, and the words, quote, the thoughts won't stop, help me. The dean and the counselor concluded that he was no threat to anyone, they said. They never searched his backpack. And then that, of course, contained the murder weapon. And then it says, they never asked his parents whether he had access to a gun and never ordered them to take him home. Then it says, no one was formally granted immunity, blah, 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 blah. It doesn't matter. It's a very long article that goes over much of the case, but the point is that the same people testified for the prosecution in James Crumbley's case that testified for the prosecution in Jennifer Crumbley's case. It was the same people, same officers, same witnesses. The story was told again for the second time. Again, clearly for James Crumbley, and then what? People were expecting a different result? I'm telling you, you talk about emotional manipulation. This proved it. The James Crumbley trial proved it. You amp up emotions among those who lost someone, and then you can actually get those people to not go after the actual people responsible because they're over emotional. They're just too amped up. So they go after the parents, not knowing that there's not a single crime that the parents engaged in, not one. Because not one crime was brought up in trial. Well, why are they in trial then? Again, I've been over this before, but this is the problem. those parents were being manipulated by the prosecutor's office. They were being manipulated by government, and they still are. They're still being manipulated by the school, and yet they keep sending their children. You talk about the weight of brainwashing. My God in heaven. It's everywhere. It's absolutely everywhere. Okay. I'm going to leave that one alone. I'm going to save that one for a little bit later, probably Friday. I have another education story that I'll bring up that was sent to me. I'm going to save that for later. I want to bring up a couple of jab-related things and get back into the jab things very quickly. And you can see this in the next war video, or you can bounce over to Greg Reese's Reese Report on Rumble. The irony of me, of course, having the conversation with Sarah Westall and with all of you on a regular basis about virology is that Greg Reese just put out in his latest Reese Report about the virology lie. And he again poses it in the form of questions, but he also brings evidence to bear because he knows this is the problem. This is the lie of all lies. The virology lie is the lie that has killed copious amounts of people, and anybody supporting that lie is contributing to propping up something that is getting people killed. This is a problem. And again, why are they doing it? Are they doing it to protect themselves? Who cares? That's not a good enough reason. Are they doing it for money? That's an even worse reason. It's terrible. But this one was from preprints. So again, this particular article is still in preprint. But again, for some reason, they're putting these articles out now like they're official and like they matter. Side note, it's also been caught that a number of these individuals who are associated with some of these peer-reviewed, quote-unquote, journal articles are, of course, as we suspected, using artificial intelligence to write their abstracts for them and even write, particular introductions for these peer-reviewed articles, whether they be medical, academic, or what have you. So that's an ongoing thing. Either way, let's take this one at face value for a minute because, again, it's not unusual. This is titled, Concerns Regarding Transfusions of Blood Products Derived from Genetic Vaccine Recipients and Proposals for Scientific Measures. Allow me to read the abstract. It's not long. And again, we're talking about jabbed blood here and it being poisonous. Quote, the coronavirus pandemic, it's already a lie, was declared by the WHO in 2020, and a global genetic vaccination program has been rapidly implemented as a fundamental solution. Well, that's actually kind of true. They served it up as the solution based on the basis of a lie. Anyway, it continues. It says, however, many countries around the world have reported that so-called genetic vaccines, such as those using modified mRNA encoding the spike protein in lipid nanoparticles as the drug delivery system, have resulted in post-vaccination thrombosis and subsequent cardiovascular damage, as well as a wide variety of diseases involving all organs and systems, including the nervous system. In this article, based on these circumstances and the volume of evidence that has recently come to light, volume of evidence, we call the attention of the medical professionals to the various risks associated with blood transfusions using blood products derived from people who have suffered from long COVID and from genetic vaccine recipients. Well, there's no such thing as long COVID, so get that out of your abstract. But either way, it continues, it says, including those who have received mRNA vaccines, and we make proposals regarding specific tests, testing methods, and regulations to deal with these risks. We expect that this proposal will serve as a basis for discussion on how to address post-vaccination syndrome and its consequences following these genetic vaccination programs, unquote. Kim Carter sent me this. Again, it seems legit, does it not? I find it interesting that they also use the term post-vaccination syndrome. PVS. It's usually just called AIDS because vaccinations damage DNA, causing, of course, a plethora of syndromes, and there you have it. but post-vaccination syndrome, or VAIDS, is probably what they would be better suited to say. Either way, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. That was received on March 18th. It's still in review. But yeah, it says this version is not peer-reviewed. But either way, it probably will be eventually. And let's just face it, peer-reviewed just means people agree to what they're reading and the particular methods that were used, and that's why it's called peer-reviewed. Okay. Couple other headlines here. There was this too. This is from WND.com. CDC issues study on myocarditis after COVID shots, and every single word is redacted. Again, that was from a couple of weeks ago. I think I brought it up when it happened, but I just wanted to revisit that again. All 148 pages of the CDC study on myocarditis after COVID shots have been redacted. Well, of course they have, because they're hiding things. Even with court orders to release things, they're still hiding stuff. Here's another one. Can't say it's not a conspiracy to commit fraud, ladies and gentlemen. This is from mprnews.com, also written by the Associated Press of all places. State Medicaid offices target dead people's homes to recoup their health care costs. So someone dies, they have a boatload of medical costs, and then whoever is the beneficiary of either the property or the belongings of said dead person, the medical industry and their lawyers, certainly in the state of Massachusetts in this particular case, are going after their belongings and their assets to pay for the outstanding medical costs that they incurred as they were a patient or receiving so-called treatment. It's a lengthy article, but I think you get the gist of it right there. Again, we're talking tens of millions of dollars here, copious amounts of money. In one particular case, this one family in Massachusetts was billed $177,000 for her father's Medicare expenses and threatened to sue for his home if she didn't pay up quickly. So there you go. This becoming law, if it isn't already law, certainly it seems to be the case there, but if this becomes law across the board, the medical industry will own everything. And who owns the medical industry? You guessed it, the Jewish lobby. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to wrap it up there. In the description below, I'm going to include 3 things. I will include, again, Sarah Westall's Substack, if you're interested in checking that one out. I will include also the 2 YouTube videos that either someone sent her or she randomly found regarding the thin ice explanation that she provided to people who were willing to hear it regarding Amazing Polly and her criticizing Amazing Polly from 2016. And you can make your own determination. So with that said, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening, and I will catch you on Friday. Peace. Thank you for listening to American Education FM. Make sure and check out AmericanEducationFM.com for more information. Take care and God bless.